So I'm Paula Broadbent. What do I do? So I'm a leadership development person and I work on supporting people in the transition into much bigger jobs, thinking very specifically about their context, really understanding that and the type of role that they're in, and then also aligning that to the individual through a variety of lenses, including through stages of adult development, which, are really important to recognise and capture. I've got very pink cheeks. Tan, who are you?
So I'm Tan Sinden and I am working as a coach and facilitator in organisational development and looking at leadership and looking at inclusion and how organisational dynamics can create a better working environment for everyone. And leadership is a key piece of that.
Your picture's much better than mine. I have to say, this is like...
I'm not sure it's even a pitch, but anyway, I literally was just like saying it to you, dudes. And this is very cliche, but I'm also a student of life, just figuring it out as I go along.
Yes, yes. Oh, you are. And Tan and I have known each other for a long time. And we're playing with this software, this Riverside software, and we thought we might also have some content that comes out of it. So we're playing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, this is cool.
And we were actually chatting about a number of things that we're doing and how we're going to change the world. Yes.
So important.
And we were chatting and I was saying there was a model that I used when I was doing some research into what it feels like to become pregnant at work, how you can get treated differently as a woman in the workplace through different stages of the maternal transition. And I did some research on that a few years ago, and I used a model as part of that research. And since then, it pops up in my head occasionally as a way to sort of categorise and explain like stuff that I see around. And so I said to Tan that I wanted to share what that model was and see what your reactions were to it. Because obviously you've got a lot more experience and breadth of, well, not obviously because people don't know you, but I know that you've got a lot more breadth of experience around diversity, equity, inclusion work than I do, because I've only seen it through the lens of this one lens. And just in my work more generally, but it's much more of a generalist and through one lens that I've seen it. So it's interesting to explore what you can see.
Yeah.
So, so the model that I used was, and I was going to share my screen, but I haven't worked out how to do that yet, so I'm just going to describe it. I can share my screen, but not in Riverside. I'd just like to say I'm not an idiot. I've got to do permissions, and I don't want to sort of turn it off and turn it on again.
It's fine. Like, you can describe it to me.
Okay.
I'll ask you anything that's not very clear.
I might try and draw it in the air.
I'm like just moving the stick for the singing bowl.
Imagine that. Every model from consultant says it's a 2x2. But yes, it is a 2x2. So the way that they look at it, I think, is very rational. So the way I think about it, and this might not be the sort of perfect sort of academic way of describing it, but the way I think about it is that it's a way, the stereotype content model is the way that we describe how societies stereotype categories of people. And it is at a societal level. And these are shorthands for how we work out when we come into contact with other people. Straight away, we're really clever as human beings, aren't we? That sort of limbic system, that animal system, has a way of working out, are these people that I've just come across? And I don't know, because when you know them, you can actually treat them as an individual. So this is like generalizations, which we do need to use, because you come across people you don't know all the time. From a very animalistic, sort of emotional perspective, what information do I know about this group of people that might tell me whether they're going to be friendly to me and whether they're going to have power that helps or harms me.
Yeah.
And this is important, right? You see it with dogs like sniffing each other out. It's very much from I think of it through the lens of emotional intelligence, because it's very much from a very basic sort of instinct level, but useful. Right? Absolutely welcome and useful. In first instance, where we don't know what's going on, it's part of who we are as humans. And the lens that happens when we do that is we automatically work out like other social mammals would. Does this person have power? And they think about power in different ways. So do they have like positional power, i.e. is this a big gorilla? Like physical power? Or do they have power through status, i.e. they look like the king, so I should bow to them because it looks like they might have power in this situation, they look like the leader here? Or do they have power in other ways? So are they competent? So do they have power in that they look like they're good at chopping down trees and I could do with them firewood? So they've got power in that they seem to have abilities that would be useful. So you look at it through those sort of lenses, and then you also balance that with, okay, so I've got to work out if they've got power or not in this sort of very generalized, quick sense sort of way of situation. And then the other side of it is, how friendly are they to me? So are they likely to be friend or foe to me? Are they likely, from what I can tell, to help me or harm me? And then these come together in this joyful box.
Yeah.
And then you get a really visceral felt sense of, does this person have power, and would they use that person, if they do have power, would they use that power against me or with me, cooperate or harm? And if they don't have power, are they someone that's friendly or actually is a foe, like is not a friendly person who doesn't have power, basically? So then you've got your 4 boxes, because you've got powerful in some way and friendly. You've got powerful in some way and unfriendly, not powerful and unfriendly, and not powerful, but I like them. They seem nice. And all these 4 categories that are really, it's just an emotional response, create a different emotion. And that's where we move from the stereotype content model to they call it the bias model, which you can see why, because it creates bias. Yeah. Because it is a felt sense. And sometimes it's true, sometimes your felt sense is true, but it is just a quick gauge. So is it really? The world's much more complex than that usually. And so if you think someone has a power in some way, like they've got wood and I need some wood, like if we just think of it as competence even rather than positional power, and they seem friendly, they did a big smile, they've got a jolly face, they look like Father Christmas or something, like a stereotype, I think that they might share that wood with me. I admire them, feel feelings of warmth, admiration, and I want to do stuff to support them and help them as well, because I want to almost reciprocate this powerful action which I assume is going to be shared. And that is the in group. That is like the in group. If we feel they have power and they're not going to use it in a way that would be helpful to us, we may resent them, we may feel jealousy, we may feel envy. And it's sort of like he's hoarding all that wood. It doesn't mean that he's going to come and attack me, but he's not cooperating me with that wood. I feel jealous of him in that wood. I'm going to steal his axe so he can't get any more wood, kind of thing. It's that kind of sense. You feel envious, jealous, maybe resentful. Why have I got that and I haven't got that? That's not fair, kind of feeling. If you are, and I did it already, I noticed when I was describing it, if you think someone doesn't have very much power and or resources or competence to get the resources that might be useful for us, and they seem lovely, then we pat them on the head. I need to patronise them in some way. They can't stand up for themselves, and I need to make sure that they can get something. It's sad, isn't it? Maybe if I get some wood, I'll give them some leftover cut bits so they won't get really cold, kind of thing. It's pity, basically. And it tends to result in help which is dependent help. So rather than I'll teach them how to chop down a tree, I should have turned off my email, there's a learner, isn't it? Rather than teaching them how to chop down a tree, I pity them. I don't think they might hurt themselves with the axe, kind of thing. And so I'll give them some leftover bits of my wood, but they're still dependent in some way because it's a patronising move, if you see what I mean. And then the last one is contempt. I don't like them. They don't have any power. I just ignore them. I might actually look down my nose at them. I might kick them, under their blanket as they're sitting there because they annoy me as I walk past if I'm feeling particularly not very nice that day. And that's the sort of contempt box. And when we feel contempt, if we don't emotionally manage that, it doesn't emotionally manage that, tend to either ignore, sideline or treat with either active or passive harm. So an example might be homeless people, dirty, disgusting, maybe and sort of move them on, take their tents away, Yeah. That kind of thing, not seeing as human beings and treating quite poorly. And so for me, noticing these emotions as they come up and noticing specifically these 4 I just really admire that person. I just viscerally get a sense of admiration. They seem right. They seem like they know what they're doing. Or that person, a bit resentful of that person. Or I pity that person. I just think they need sort of a bit patronising. Or I feel contempt for that person. They just annoy me. I just... disgust almost. Those feelings, I think it's really emotionally intelligent. I think everyone has those feelings. It's just real, it's human. And it's really emotional intelligence to stop and say, is that true? Is it helpful? What assumptions have I made in that situation, so that we don't automatically respond to those feelings in the logic, what is the animalistic response, if you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think a lot in other times in organisations, this assumptions of what I would usually expect to see in someone I admire. So Father Christmas type, I don't know. Or, a strong, because we see a lot of leaders who look a certain way, we assume that they are the leader. I've just come into the room, there's a tall white man in a suit commanding the space. I presume that they're the leader, not the waiter.
Yeah.
And it might be true. Actually, we kind of reinforce it and make it true. I just think it's really interesting how we challenge that to see if it is true and how we reinforce it. Because I think it can be reinforced. This was my thing, was it can be reinforced by, I assume, that was the thing I had the other day that I mentioned to you, that even though this woman's got 8 years experience shadowing and is now going to step up into the role and has been working on my project for that long, there was an assumption from another colleague that she would need to be patronised and given extra support in order to step up. Because there was an assumption from looking at her that she didn't have the competence, but she's lovely, and so you need to give her extra support. And I'm like, she's been shadowing this for 8 years, she's got loads of competence. That is not true. There was an automatic assumption that she needed to be patronised, and it came from a good place, like a benevolent place. We don't want her to fail. What would make you think like she was going to fail? What data do you have apart from she's a blonde woman and I just assume that she doesn't have competence? It sounds really bad, doesn't it? But I can't assume where else that would have come from.
Yeah. So it's like the kind of like the sense of stereotype, the shorthand.
Yeah.
It's, it's drawing that kind of behaviour or asking for that extra kind of support for this individual, rather than recognising actually they've got this in the bag. It's been 8 years of developing into this role. It's that shorthand of, but they still must be slightly less competent, slightly less powerful, and therefore might need more support.
Yeah.
It's that shorthand of the stereotype, isn't it?
And I think it becomes then self-reinforcing, because if you are stepping up into role, everyone feels a little bit nervous, and if you don't, then I worry. Are you just assuming, there's always going to be different stuff. It always feels a little bit. But to have someone assume that it undermines your confidence, which then may make you not step forward, or may make you step forward more slowly, or may make you, it may actually become like a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think.
Yeah.
But any time, so my big thing is that really the emotional intelligence of questioning when we're stereotyping and just checking what reality is, but also making sure that we don't reinforce stereotypes in the way that we act around things. That was my other thing, because anytime anybody gets a sense, and it isn't being completely emotional intelligent about it, but anytime anyone gets a sense that people need extra help, they presume they're not competent. So they either treat them with contempt or pity and patronise. And so it's that sense that how do you support people that do need help without making it the kind of help which is
drawing on the
patronising
shorthand of the stereotype content model.
Yeah.
What other things then do you feel that we need to do to kind of stop that from happening?
I think it's really good to name it, and I think what I like about the model is you discuss it at societal level, and I find that really helpful, because I don't know if you agree, I think there's a general assumption that's unexamined in society in general that we can't be sexist against ourselves, or a woman couldn't be sexist to another woman, for example. Like, she kind of made that decision out of sexism, she's a woman, but we hold these stereotypes at societal level. And we are part of society, so we can be sexist against ourselves. We can assume we don't have the same amount of power, even though there's no reason why we couldn't. And because we don't then take that power, we've made it come true. So we're really
it's the internalized, right? Yeah. It's like the stereotyping of all these embedded kind of behavior, and also been driven by a very primitive part of our brain.
Yeah.
Of just sense checking quickly our instincts, whether it's safe or good here, or beneficial or not, like you say, friend or foe. And so all of these very, sort of snapshot kind of like instincts is drawn very shorthand, misinformation, based, and it's our kind of, it's then our kind of emotional intelligence, which was what you spoke to, and our cognitive, reasoning that brings this together into actually what is actually true and helpful here, and what is then not going to be if we react or carry on a certain behaviour based on these kind of, initial instincts. And when do we become, because we all do it, when do we be conscious to that, and then therefore choose to not play into that? An example.
Go on.
So all the internalized things, definitely, and it's societal level, and then we replicate that in like more, kind of smaller, intimate or group level dynamics. Speaking, this reminds me of like when I was at a conference and was talking about understanding different layers of privilege, right, and how that draws on to that stereotype content model that you're talking about, that plays into that as well. This afterwards, when I was talking about this co-CEO, co-director, I guess, he came up and he's like this, I think he was Dutch, this tall Dutch white man, who came, and he was like, oh yeah, I thought that was really insightful, and I really feel that and see that actually when I'm thinking about it. And we just had this conversation because he was talking about his partner, as in business partner, who is a director as well, and how in scenarios when they're travelling business-wise, it'd be him that people go to people talk to, and kind of they're both there, but it's like he's defaulted as the authority person. Even on a train, sitting in first class, they're sitting together, and he told me this story that it really kind of made him feel like, there's something that we need to kind of be, how it plays out is that, she would be asked about her ticket, everybody asked about their tickets, and he showed his, and she's still looking for hers. And it was kind of like, well, I'll come back to you. Instead of kind of like, I'll come back to you, I'm sure you'll find it. It was a case of, well, if you haven't got it, you have to pay for a new ticket. And she's like, I'm sure it's here, I'm looking for it. And he just felt like it's the way that it was handled was more an assumption that she must not have a ticket and she must be paying for it now, rather than kind of, just give her the benefit of the doubt, come back to her when she's had time to look for her ticket.
Absolutely. And I really like that sort of framing, in that if people are acting out of assumption and their base instincts, then if you have characteristics that people associate with in groups, they'll just assume that you're it. They'll just assume that the tall white Dutch man has power and is friendly. And so they want to get on their side, and they will like extend extra. They'll just assume that they've got a ticket. Why wouldn't you buy a ticket? Like, that would be strange. And so it's almost, you have to prove it wrong, if you see what I mean. So in that way, I can understand that framing of privilege. Absolutely. And that it is assumed when people are in stereotype that I'm doing the right thing. That I'm playing the game nicely. And so then logically, if the world is always acting in stereotype, that person will get more, people will just be kinder to them. Like that example, just be a bit more, show a bit more, you have to prove things bad rather than assuming bad, almost. Yeah. And sometimes you have to do quite a lot to dissuade people from their emotional reaction. This is emotional intelligence. So some people are quite obviously incompetent, but they look like they should be competent, so I just can't believe it. It feels wrong.
Yeah.
But where that's coming from, it's not that. Where I think it starts to fall down is it starts to feel like, and this shouldn't be the case, but like that Dutch guy should feel guilty because people are reacting to him like that. It's not his fault.
Yeah.
And it's not her fault that people are reacting to her. It's societally held. She didn't do it. It's not like if she'd worn a different skirt, it would have, like, she didn't do it. And the person that's got 8 years experience and then someone's assumption is to patronise them, she didn't do anything for that. Nobody's doing anything to cause this. It's nobody's fault. It's the fault of the people that are making the assumptions. So there's something about how can we just get people to recognise this is a really emotionally unintelligent way to behave.
Yeah.
That's the game, I think.
Yeah. So does this lead into some of the work that you're doing in terms of raising this sort of awareness and coming at this in terms of an emotional intelligence development?
Yeah, so I think it's related to the different dimensions of the stages of adult development, actually, because it is quite visceral and it is true, and we hold all of these stages within us. But But I think as a society and as individuals, we can mature in a way that we realise that that's not true. You know, like my initials, we don't believe everything that we think or feel. Recognising that we've sort of, and that's why it's sort of a maturity thing that doesn't necessarily come as you get older, as we know. You can have old souls in younger bodies and older bodies with very young ways of being. We know that. Think of that on the world stage as well as within our own lives, I'm sure. And so there's something about just recognising the importance of what maturity looks like, what emotional intelligence looks like as you become more mature, breadth of perspective. There's something about actually looking at the situation and trying to explore that and sort of challenging our first instincts sometimes, unless we're in danger, because that's what it's there for, isn't it? It's for when we're in danger.
Yeah.
And if we're using it all the time, and actually we need a shorthand when we're in danger and it's new people, we need that. But if we're using that all the time, and it feels like people do use that all the time, that feels very basic. It's not true.
And from your perspective, like, what are the implications for our organisations, our workforce, society?
Can I just say, do you like my armpit glow?
Yeah, you literally lift your arm up and it's like, let my light through.
Out. I have to work on the lighting. There are loads of implications. What implications do you see in your work?
Well, the implications I see in my work is that it creates a very unhealthy company organisational culture where there's this sense of the system needs to be fixed because, you know, we're not being inclusive or equitable, and we're just not getting enough people of different backgrounds, from the global majority, disabled leadership, and we're just not being kind of an organisation that everyone's kind of treated fairly and inclusive in that sense. And that work always feels really challenging. People always feel very emotively reactive to it because it sort of either taps into a sense of guilt and shame about why is this the case, which then can create a layer of kind of emotional work that then becomes the work rather than now let's look at the system and look at where there are blockages that needs to be sort of unblocked, right? And where the stereotype content model is really playing out, like you say, is kind of making these decisions happen and creating these dynamics that becomes either people react to it or gets treated in this way. And then there's people who, you know, if it's like a promotion of,
no,
because we're looking at diverse talent development, and it's kind of like, well, why is there a special program, right, to support people? Well, that's because, you know, our EDI goals we're not meeting our EDI goals, or we want to meet our EDI goals, right? So whether it's kind of from a reaction of, you know, we need to do something here because we're very low scoring in these areas, or actually these are our ambitions and, you know, we need to be proactive at hitting them. So so it will come from these angles. And what happens is that these interventions are done in place to help develop individual diverse leaders to kind of take that next promotion, to go into more senior leadership positions, and therefore bring that breadth, right, and depth, which is what you kind of hope for when you have a widespread lived experience, perspective, skills and backgrounds into those senior leadership positions. Bring more of that through like the pipeline, through the development. And what can happen is that actually it can focus on supporting these individuals without looking at the system as a whole.
See, and that's what
needs to change.
So I'm so excited. I've written a few things down of what you said. Can I explore a few of them? And I was like,
let the light in.
Let the light in. I wanted to hear the full thing of what you were saying and where you were going, and there was so much in there. I could go in lots of different directions. You know, I find this fascinating, and I think this is the work, right? From so many different perspectives. From my perspective, just stepping back before I go to the things that stood out for me, my focus of this is it's great to make sure that we get the right people in the right jobs at the right time. And fairness is, it's like everyone, you can feel justice and unfairness here, and it's not something that we want. And there's something about just how can we make better decisions to get the right people in the right jobs at the right time. And that is my focus, rather than I would like to help a group like pregnant women, which is where I started with this, or because I'd had a lived experience of that, and so I was like, oh, what was going on there? That's the first time I felt like I was in our group. Because I tend to be in one of the high boxes because that's what people assume, because of, not necessarily because it's true. Well, hopefully I make it true, but as I'm white and middle class.
You live up to your stereotype.
Well, no, it's like the stereotypes might be true sometimes. It might be accurate, but not always. Or maybe we do live up to them. Oh, there's so much anyway.
Yeah. There's so much to pull out here, right? Yeah.
Emotional work, really. So the things that I put down that I want to explore, if that's okay, Louise.
Yeah, please do.
I wrote down emotional work about these special programs, promotions to interventions to fix what has gone wrong historically, and we know it has because just look around. I mean, you do best boss, worst boss in a facilitated group, and there's a lot of worst boss stories. We're not getting this right. The people in power are not always, doing a great job. And then there's something about, just this how we develop through the right pipeline through the system. And it feels short term and long term then, doesn't it? So it feels like, what are the stuff that just needs doing now? Like, come on, this is like a tanker. And how do we actually change so that we don't need the quick fixes? So going back to that emotional work, I feel like you danced around that a little bit. Tell me about the emotional work.
The emotional work. I think because there's quite a few layers to unpack, and I'm not sure, because I'm thinking on kind of the spot here that I've really sort of thought this through. It becomes something that is kind of like, well, what am I feeling here? Why am I reacting to this? And reacting to it in a sense of, if I'm thinking about your sort of stereotype content model, am I reacting to this? Is the reaction a pity reaction? Right? Is it kind of, oh, now I feel guilt, I feel shame, I have more, so I need to, there's something here about kind of the pity, and I need to sort of do more and do my bit here. Give the scraps of wood, right?
Yeah.
Just to go back to your analogy.
Patronise that poor person that has
that group,
power.
right?
Joe, but isn't that really interesting? Because what you're describing to me is that you've highlighted in the room that someone hasn't been given access to power, and so they put them in that bottom box and either feel contempt or pity. Oh, well, they don't deserve it. Or, I feel so guilty about that. What can I do to help them? Rather than it's not true. Like, it is true that there wasn't access to power, but how do we just come out of this paradigm of it?
Yeah. So it then sort of like, if we kind of, I mean, I'm working with the stereotype content model here in terms of what you've sort of been talking about. So it can go into that, right? So that becomes the emotional kind of work and response that could have those two outcomes. I don't have evidence of this, but I don't feel that it has the opposite kind of result of now these people or these groups or whatever it is that we choose to focus on is put into the two boxes. That is kind of, actually they do have power, they do have competencies, it becomes like a trajectory that kind of creates a different layer of work then that needs to be done organisationally as well as personally, rather than getting on with the job of actually, are we creating good skills, competent leaders for the future that is a diverse pool of leaders that can then, that we make sure the system doesn't then get in the way of them becoming leaders.
And it does sound, whenever we say system, I know exactly what you're saying, but I keep thinking it's the deep state. But no, it's this kind of sense of just this kind of shared reality that isn't really true, this shared way that we've been doing things, which is not always accurate maybe. So, and I find that really interesting, because I think, so what you describe, and we're only looking at it through this lens, we could look at it through so many lenses I'm sure, but the stereotype content model. So, and it makes sense, because if we're still in stereotype, if we haven't broken the idea that this is a stereotype which we have to be emotionally intelligent about and just kind of step away from, and we stay in stereotype, in the room, I guess, we've just told everyone that these people have less power. So why would they be in the higher box? We've just told everybody this group of people here that look like this have less power, like in reality. And if we still haven't broken that idea that we're chatting in stereotype, it will elicit contempt or pity. I find that really, really interesting, because there is some research. Oh, I still haven't turned off that email. I'll do it in a second. But there is some research that they say actually when you raise the awareness of bias in organizations, it actually makes people more biased, because they're like, no, I've been on the training, I've been on the unconscious bias training,
I've done the work, but actually have you?
But to me, maybe it's very, very complicated, but maybe one small part of it is you've just told me that this group of people have less power, and so I automatically then, it's reinforced my idea that they have less power.
Yeah.
It's made it worse.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to patronise them. Like,
I can choose, right, to stay, if I was in contempt, to move into pity.
yes.
Maybe that's the best we can.
If we stay in that model,
Yeah.
don't break the idea of this is a stereotype and it's not very emotionally intelligent. And I'm putting it in quite harsh terms in that way to try and push that narrative. So then I completely understand, and I have nothing, I'm not like, pushback, but I completely understand why there would be special programs for, and I wrote this down, for interventions to support people who haven't been given access to the resources to be able to move up through an organisation. Because we want we need, like, for a lot of reasons, it's not about being nice, although it is nice to be nice. It's about having the best right people in the right jobs throughout the organisation.
And that we should want that, right? As leaders, as senior leaders of like your whole organisation, that's what you would want, right?
To make your life easier, and most people, when you've got a big job, there's too much going on, big job. You want your life to be easy. You want productivity to come. So having like stale milk, pale, whatever it is, everybody one-minded decisions. You're not going to get the same breadth of experience. You may have made assumptions that have over-promoted people. There's all sorts of stuff and there'll be really good people in the right places at the right time. But you don't know which is which. If you've been promoting off stereotype, you don't know, because it's not off accuracy. It's off assumption. So I understand why there would be programs. Could it be the case, though, when there are special programs, if people are still living in stereotype, that keeps people in that bottom box because they need extra help? And it's not true, probably. Well, I think all leaders need help, because there's not a lot of great ones around. They all need help.
Well, I think it's true to an extent if the access to resources and opportunities hasn't historically not been, for example, you can see, if you talk in terms of numbers, you can see very quickly where funds have gone to, right, in terms of developing things and how and what the numbers are for that, for example. So you can kind of look to see like where maybe more resources have been drawn or less resources have been. So you can kind of like sort of do it in that sense, but not that's only a bit of the picture. That's not the whole picture. And so another element to that is kind of what happens after this. So there can be, for example, there's a recent review in an area that I work in where they've looked at these kind of intervention programs to help develop diversity, and some of it has had positive outcomes. The movement of increase of senior leaders is still not as successful as you'd want it to be, and also when people one of the things that has been a key area of concern is that when people get promoted into those positions, when it's almost like the last resort, or we might as well give this person
cliff going.
Yes, yeah. Or they get promoted into these positions, but they're not actually given power, or they don't have power to change the system.
And maybe because there's this...
And then they leave.
Stereotype assumption that they need extra help, so you couldn't just give all the power over because they need extra help. Like this pity assumption, they've only been come through because of this. Do you see what I mean? So why would we give the whole reins of power? And it's not true, of course. Gosh, that sounds... But it feels like... And when you describe that, even when people have been given the skills, like extra skills development, so we've all been on the same courses, they're still not then being promoted in the same levels. So it's not about the reality of whether that individual has got the skills on the CV or not. It's about my assumption about whether they've got the competence to do the job. And so this is where I keep coming back to. Of course we need to skills develop, but there's something really big systemically, and it systemically sounds like it's a big conspiracy theory. I think it's just living from assumption and being really emotionally active to our base instincts, which is such a bad idea if you want to actually run a business or an organisation. So that's where I'm sort of coming from. It's to sort of start having those conversations about, can we just face reality here? and double check we're not making assumptions.
What are the costs of opportunities here, right?
Can I tell a story? I want to tell a story. This was a few years ago, and I was doing, and I've done a lot of assessments for different organisations at senior level over the years. I'll change some of the details, but anyway, I'm sure they won't see themselves. There were several people going for a CEO position. It was a medium-sized organisation, and there were several people going for a CEO position, and it came down to a final few. In the end, the board were choosing between two candidates. This became it was like viscerally apparent. This was not subtle, which is why I use it. And these two candidates had gone through various, really rigorous assessment through various lenses. And it wasn't like one person's opinion. And the way it all came together and came out was there was a woman who was on the verge of being overqualified for the position because they'd done bigger jobs in bigger organisations before, and even though this was like the top job, it's a smaller organisation, and they'd been in the industry for a very long time. They were slightly older, they were in their mid-50s, female, as I say, northern. So we've got some intersectionality there, maybe, if we're thinking about it in those terms. And their reports went forward to the board, and it was very clear that they were the preferred candidate. And they had been sent the reports as well to say, basically, you're almost overqualified for this position, like fives and, whatever. And then there was this other candidate that they decided they liked was in their mid-30s, underqualified for the position, so dangerously underqualified for the position, it was almost on the Dunning-Kruger curve if they didn't really understand the complexity or scale of the role that they were facing by some of the naive ways that they'd explored some of the concepts as far as breadth of perspective and the kind of thing that you would expect. And very clear in the report which was sent to them in the board that they were not ready and maybe a couple of steps away, maybe in the future, but this was too soon. Male, younger, very middle-class southern accent, intersectionality again. And the board decided to go for the man because they felt the woman was cocky.
Okay. Yeah, was cocky, and how how did they feel that would affect negatively on the business?
I think what happened in that regard is they'd got this report that they were brilliant, and she came in and they decided they didn't like her. Now, why they didn't like her, I don't know. Maybe she came in and she was very confident and they felt like as a woman, like this wasn't becoming or something. I'm not really sure, but it felt very much like she went into the high competence, low warmth box. So kind of envy, jealousy, almost resentment. They were almost like, really, her? They couldn't deny she had the competence. And somehow he, despite clearly not being ready and actually probably being dangerous for his career to be put in that position, was put in the admiration box. We should give them extra support. They are competent, it's fine. And I think this is just an example of when we're so, and this was so clearly in the stereotype because it was weird. It was like, I don't know what you're doing here. And it was so visceral as well because they couldn't be convinced logically that this might be a risk, this might not be appropriate for the organisation, that this was not recommended through various experts. They couldn't let go of that emotion that they were warm to him and they'd taken a coldness to her. And they couldn't get past that. It was an emotionally intelligent response. Just there's something in my gut that tells me it's not right kind of thing, which is, intuition is a thing, but sometimes it's just visceral, undigested emotional reaction. And I just think that, like that example, what happens, it's not about fairness, it's not about having more, it's nice, but it's not about having more women CEOs. It's about, quite clearly in that example, less qualified man was given the role over a more qualified woman. That's what we want to stop.
Yeah.
And through every lens of what that looks like.
So what interests me as well through this is what you've said, that they've gone through an extensive, they brought experts in, right? They looked at assessments. They've gone through an extensive process of trying to choose the best person at the right time for the job, right? And they ignored that, and they still made a decision from their kind of visual reactional.
Yes. And this
how do we stop that then? If expertise and recommendations...
Exactly. And we know this from recent years of living in the world. You cannot logic someone out of a position they didn't logic themselves into. So it's how we start to bring to life and visually start to have the conversations around, and I know this is just one model, and I'm sure there's lots of other brilliant ones out there, but like a structure, because once I knew that model, it's not a complicated model, warmth, competence, you know, what's the balance? Like, once you see that, it was quite apparent that that was what was going on. Because there's not logic, it is emotional. So it's almost like seeing it as an emotional intelligence tool for you're emotionally feeling this. Logically, this doesn't fit. Can we explore that emotional feeling and have a rational conversation about it? And I feel that emotional intelligence is so poorly understood, even though Daniel Goleman and the like have been talking about it for like 30 years, that it's not explored, for example, through that lens. And I think that would be a really interesting lens to explore it through.
Yeah, because it's like, if we know all the things that we need to know and still make a decision and our emotion still wins, then what can we do, right? So, yeah.
I think this is really important. So separate to this, sometimes on programmes that I run, we talk about how emotionally driven humans can be, and how, you know, system 1 and 2 thinking and the whole Kahneman stuff and the elephant and the rider and all of this kind of thing. Who's in control? Is it the elephant or the rider being the logic? Both are important, right? But don't assume that if the elephant didn't want to go another way, that the rider has any choice about it. Like, and I think sometimes where we most fall down is when people believe that they are purely rational beings, because it's not true. And they are probably the ones that are more led by emotion, because they don't even admit the emotion's there.
Yeah. So that there's like not seeing the elephant driving them in a different way. I'm still going there.
I'm going this way. You know, like, and so it's almost like the elephant decides it's going that way, and you logically, this is the path. And because you don't recognise the elephant has any power, oh, it must be my instinct to go this way. There must be, and you sort of start to almost make up reasons logically why you're going that way. And it is that kind of rationalisation of emotional decisions. And I think the people that really believe that they are driven only by logic are the ones that are most susceptible to be emotionally led. And so you could probably, like Machiavellian-wise, create emotional response in them that they would that they would go with in another direction. But logic's not going to do it, basically.
Yeah. So what are the things we need to do then to kind of bring awareness of what emotional intelligence is, and 2, to be able to develop our emotional intelligence?
So emotional intelligence is a big topic, isn't it? And it's broader than this. But I think this is really interesting to maybe, I mean, this is my first thought, I don't know what you think. Those 4 emotions are quite stark. Like, and we know what we mean, you know, like envy, resentment, jealousy. They're all on the same sort of spectrum of, it's a similar visceral feeling. Contempt, pity, and admiration. And if we automatically have a feeling like that, or a feeling like that comes up, this isn't complex emotional intelligence, isn't it? We can say, right, what's the logical backstory to having that emotion? I automatically feel admiration for that person. Okay, so admiration is, you think that they've got competence or power and they're sort of warm to you. That's what admiration is. So you admire them for that. You sort of see it as a positive positioning of power. And it's that kind of slight questioning in our head, emotional intelligence way. What have they done to demonstrate that to me? Or is that an assumption? Or if I pity someone, that means that my assumption is, or I feel like I need to go and patronise them or pat them on the head or something. My assumption is they don't have all the resources that they need within them, and I somehow need to give them help in some way, in a way that, you know, they don't have it themselves. What makes me think that they don't have all the resources they need? Maybe that's true. Sometimes people don't have all the resources they need, but what evidence could there be to challenge that they do actually have those resources? Like, you know, that person that's had 8 years of experience, maybe they have got the resources they need then. You know, like, just that sort of intelligence of intelligently noticing our emotions and just having a second to check in and just be interested, be curious about them.
To really kind of verify in some ways, you know, whether you are stereotyping or shorthanding, like your reaction to certain things. And the key thing for me in this is that actually key positions of decision making and influence that people can have, how this, like, obviously all of us being more emotionally intelligent, being, not reacting and playing to the stereotype content model, and therefore either helpfully or unhelpfully discriminate and elevate or admire and surrender, right? Because that's another thing, could kind of, that admiration, if it's not checked with actual competencies and warmth, then you're surrendering positions of power to
putting naive people who don't know what they're doing in positions of power over you and your organisation or your country. Is this a good idea? Would be the question. So double checking that our innate assumptions, whatever box that we put them in. And there's something really interesting, because it has to be a personally led real curiosity, because we can always justify it if someone else challenges us and we're on the back foot. Like, we can always make up a thing. And not even like in a trying to lie way, but in a just rationalising way. Exactly. So it has to be. So stop putting people in positions of power who don't have, and this is a future long-term thing, obviously. This is like a big game question. Who don't have the breadth of perspective or the emotional intelligence or the emotional curiosity to question themselves and challenge inbuilt assumptions, and so make poor decisions which create nonsense. That would be ideal, wouldn't it?
It would be ideal. That would be ideal. And that would be, the work, I guess, in terms of
the long-term work. Like this. Oh, this is the long-term work coming through. In the short term, though, if we haven't got people challenged out of those stereotypes, we could wonder how, without meaning to, we're embedding the stereotypes. Are you frozen or because your eye?
No, you did. You literally did. You did just freeze because you went stereotype and you had your pen there. So I was like, what are you about to say next?
Because, and this is quite provocative, but I think in the short term, I think there is some stuff that we do and some stuff that we talk about things which actually, it doesn't break the stereotype, it enhances the stereotype. It plays up to the stereotype. Like, certain people need more help. Well, we're keeping them in this box that needs help then, and pity. Do you see what I mean? But they do need help.
So it kind of, it makes me think about, what do we reframe, right? What do we do What do we do differently and stop doing, because we know that actually if we look at it, why it's not working is because it's still playing to that, or actually what we're addressing, that we're just addressing one part, right? And there's another part here, another piece here that we're not addressing. So the emotional intelligence and skills and abilities and competence of individuals, as well as, and how that maps out across an organisational kind of maturity, intelligence. Because I know it's individuals, organisations are made up of individuals.
But it's also cultural, because it's held at a societal level. So, for example, just our assumptions around here that if you've been to that department, that makes you brilliant at doing that job. Is it true? Or is that just how it's worked before? Could you do it in a different way? It can be other assumptions.
Yeah.
We're looking through sort of putting people in boxes, but it can be so layered.
Operationally, right, in terms of certain different department or like, for example, culture and creative sector that I've sort of worked in and have my background from, there could be this kind of sense of it's like productions and production side of things and creative side of things, and kind of like the creatives are, could be what could feel in some ways that they're kind of being just ran by a bunch of administrators effectively, and the creatives could, or the productions could be, well, it's all about the creatives, and there's not like the level of respect or consideration for like productions, and it's kind of like, well, actually no, you need both to work well together. And
like sales and operations,
and no one should be more or less than the other, right? So
or the finance guys who count the money, who are brilliant, are seen as almost making the money because they're the ones presenting it. Like, no, like everyone's valuable, Okay, so there's definitely that. There's something that you said at the start that I wanted to come back to, just as a final sort of question or thought, which I was really interested in. And you said the global majority. My dog's at the door. He's okay, sunbathing. Global majority.
Right.
Tell me about that term.
So that term, Okay, so terms come, right? They evolve, they come and go. There's things that gets developed, and it's often kind of led, I guess, by what people claim, right? By what people claim to be kind of an okay term to term them, right? So from when I started in EDI, so it's kind of a more evolvement of that. It was BAME, so it was shorthand to BAME, which is black and minority ethnic, right? And then people, it was kind of like a movement about we don't really like that term. It's kind of like
labels are horrible anyway, aren't
they? We don't like that. So it kind of like evolved and moved into kind of black and Asian minority ethnic. So it kind of like becomes, and then if you're in America, it was black BPOP or something, black people of colour, right? So you're like, people of colour. But it's like people of colour, it's like, that's everybody. It's like saying there's all the white people and then everybody else is the people of colour, right? And actually it's everybody. So when I talk about diversity, I talk about everyone, right? And because I talk about it as a whole, like how inequality affects us all as a whole, and how we do what we need to in all parts of that creates, a healthy system for everyone.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's not a win-lose situation, and how we fix that issue. It's kind of like, how do we approach something as a win-win solution focus?
But also, how can we just be accurate?
And how can we just be accurate? Yeah. So it evolved then into kind of, those sort of shorthand.
So where did global majority come from?
And global majority, I would say it's a term in more recent times, and it's been credited to, I'm sure other people have said it, but it's been sort of credited, as far as my awareness is, to a lecturer professor at Leeds University who wanted to reframe the term of minority ethnic or black and minority ethnic groups as actually, if you look at the global demographic, they are the global majority. However, I also feel, so it's now been sort of claimed more because it's about, I think,
more empowering.
It's about kind of positioning the fact that let's not kind of be down on ourselves because we're a minority and we need to be fearful and we need to be kind of like, oh, look at us here, we're in a minority. It's like positioning
exactly
differently.
I mean, that's what I was interpreting it as, because to me, if I look at it through the lens of the stereotype content model, and I haven't been playing with all of this, which is why I wanted to ask you, but global majority speaks to, we have power. We have power. There's loads of us. Not in a aggressive way, but in a, like, it's not this, look at us, poor us. No, we're a global majority. We're here with you. We're a global majority. And it puts like the emphasis more on that top half of the quadrant. Yeah.
So it's helpful, I guess, in terms of people claiming that rather than, oh, we're, the minority.
An underdog.
I have been in rooms where I've done development and training where, this is not to kind of name and shame or anything. But I have heard people in leadership positions who have said, well, if they're global majority, then why do they need more support and more help then?
But that's good. But to me, that's good, because it's not about support and help. It's helping you make better decisions. It's not about helping them. I mean, that's the framing that I'm trying to get through.
But I think it was more about, well, we should be worried about us. We should be worried about this then, or we should be focusing on that, because that's not. So I think that it can then either be misunderstood naively or weaponized as actually no, we don't do anything here, we don't progress that, because if that's the case, then it was framed a little bit like along the lines of, well, there's always the what about it, so sometimes it can be a distraction to the work, because it can be, what about this? So, well, actually, no, the program that's helped to develop more black scholarships into higher education, for example. So, well, actually, what about working class poor boys? That is an issue, right? That's also not what we're talking about here. So it becomes this situation where it can, like people can get then hung up on a language or a term, and that becomes a focus of drawing attention and energy and, discussion and time, rather than it being about okay, that's just a term. Now let's move this on and do this.
And that's a distraction. That's just rationalisation, isn't it? I think it's an interesting term, though, in that it does feel more powerful. And if we're looking through the lens of power and as related to competence, that shift, the danger that you would have if people remain in stereotype is the shift is not seen as a friendly one, so it creates resentment.
Yeah, it becomes...
But it's
so in that scenario, it was a felt of a hostile.
Yeah,
like
and that's because it went into a resentment box. But that tells me that it worked. From an emotional response, they still need to get more emotionally intelligent. And then the question is, if they're going to stay in stereotype, which we don't want, but if we're going to embed stereotype, would we rather be resented or pitted? And
either way, it can cause harm, right?
Both can cause harm. Yeah, but there's something interesting in that shift.
How we can
sort of shift. Language shifted.
How we can shift, yeah.
Emotion just through that language. I think there is something really interesting around this idea that from a stereotypes perspective that there are in-groups and out-groups, and why aren't we helping this, why aren't we helping that, why aren't we should make it so that everybody can succeed and no one is better or worse than any other. I think in reality, you know, and it's not not like some groups. It's only in stereotype that we believe some groups don't need any support. All of us do. We're all humans, you know. So it would only be in stereotypes. I'm sort of talking out in my head, but to say, what about white working class boys? Oh gosh, of course, a white working class boy in front of me may need some support. So it's only in stereotype that we would assume that they don't need any help because they get it anyway.
Yeah.
But then, if the world is working in stereotype, they're more likely to get help. But it doesn't mean that they will as an individual. The game is to stop people playing stereotypes, is the game, isn't it?
Yeah, so that we can actually focus on what's accurate that needs to be done.
Yeah, what's real.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
My battery's going to run out.
Sorry, okay, I'm talking your ear off and it's been 1 hour and 9 minutes. So.
Oh no, it's been fascinating conversation.
So
I didn't realise how much we could talk.
Oh, we can talk. I'm sure we could talk. So what would you take from the conversation? And I can say what I took from the conversation.
Well, I think it was really helpful to kind of think through the lens of what I was doing, and the work that I've been doing in organisational development and the DE&I. I guess progress that I wanted to kind of support organisations through that stereotype content model, and really thinking about how we develop that emotional intelligence.
Change the world, man.
Yeah, and the kind of recognising that there's this sort of instinctive element to it, that emotions drive, still emotions trump. A bit like culture beats strategy, right? It's kind of, we know this, so what are we going to do to shift, right? Even if the shift still, it's not, it's still not breaking out of the model, but it's still something that interestingly shifts. And how can we position that as something that's helpful rather than harmful? So yeah, there's quite a lot really there for me. But yeah, the emotional work, the long term and the short term. So in the short term, what are we doing that we need to stop? What are we doing that we need to reframe so that it's accurate, it's more precise on what the issue is and help the situation.
The reality of that,
rather than creating something else, rather than creating another strand that takes us into, can be unproductive, right?
What really stood out for me from what you're saying now for the conversation, and I really want to explore further, is I'm really interested. I've coded for this, right? The story I'm telling myself about when someone started to push back, when you started to use the term global majority, and it was just one example that you gave, I know it doesn't always have this reaction, is that it did feel like it went more to a resentment box. Well, why are we doing it for that then? We need to do it for people I pity more. Yeah. How simple that was to shift that emotion, not logic, emotion. So how could you, if we're going to stay in stereotype, which isn't ideal, how could we shift not only competence, but shift it to that top right box of also warmth? Yeah. So how do we demonstrate global majority, and what else do you need to say that would trigger a warm response? Because that is, I'm sure there are no magic bullets, but that feels like Harry Potter wand work.
just shifting from one quadrant to the X, right?
It would take us a while to get rid of the model, but can we use it against the system to do reasonable good things, not in a mean?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. It's for a bigger purpose, right? For a bigger drive in terms of creating better leadership, creating more peaceful and reconciling society, for me anyway.
Now we're really going for it. Big purpose. We've got to have a big purpose.
Big purpose, working in my circle of influence.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Right, I'm going to stop the recording and then we can see what we got from it.